I was the result of a encounter between a 15-year-old and an older man. My mom was 15 when she got pregnant, and I had what we could qualify, I guess, as a very adversity-ridden younger years. My dad, never was in the picture. I was bullied extensively as a youth, and it got me into a space where I was wanting to interfere with that as opposed to recreate it. I found myself developing an incredible amount of resilience. For me, I got so used to be disappointed that disappointment no longer bothered me. And if disappointment doesn't bother you as an 8-year-old, what is that going to do for you as an adult?
People that follow you on Instagram, they're aware of the leg injury. They're aware of the amputation and how you just kind of went through that with grace. But I never really heard the story of how that even came about. Like, what took you to this place to where you had this elective surgery to amputate?
We're going to get hit. That is an absolute certainty. If there's one thing that is certain, is you are going to get hit with adversity. When adversity does hit and you are constantly challenging yourself, you are constantly reframing smaller adversity, what you are doing is teaching yourself that adversity is just a part of life, not the end of it, that you're going to come on the other side in one way or another. And I to be frank with you, man, those were the last, 10 years here were terrifying. And we also know that making life-altering, potentially catastrophic decision at such a young age, disconnecting the parents from even the rights to know, it is absolutely mind-blowing what's going on here. We tell our veterans that are suffering from mental illness. There has been a few instances where veterans were told to essentially seek assisted suicide. We've been so comfortable for so long that we started fretting things that are inconsequential in the end. But because we haven't faced adversity in so long, and that having an 80-inch TV and a computer in our pocket has allowed us to get some instant gratification going, we have completely lost sight of hardship and having to work together, having a sense of community. Unfortunately, comfort isn't good for humans at all. Do you know what happens when you give humans the ability to do whatever they want? They will do whatever they want.
I think people will hear what you just said and feel likely motivated by it. Let's get to work. Let's do it. But how do they start?
It's interesting that you say that most people are going to want to run through a brick wall, and other people have already shut down this podcast. The fact is, you can't help anybody who doesn't want to be helped. We know that he who has a why can bear almost any how. Okay? So what are you here for? What do you want to do? What lights your soul on fire? If you haven't tied your life to the things that light your heart on fire, it's difficult to motivate for absolutely anything. Now, people might listen to this podcast and say, man, that sounds like a lot of work. But imagine if you front-loaded that work and you have another 40 or 50 years of life to live, and you are living all that you ever wanted because you have taken those steps. Would it be worth it?
The Patina'd podcast is about the earned wisdom found in pain. It's about chasing failure, catching it, and using that as an opportunity. It's about scar tissue and sinew. It's about stretch marks and dented fenders and refusing to hide them. It's about pushing our insecurities and shame to the forefront instead of behind us. Instead of seeing rust as something that compromises a structure's integrity, we choose to see it as the grit that builds character. This is the Patina'd podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Patina'd podcast. So today's guest is Seb Lavoie. And sorry, I said it wrong. Today's guest is Seb Lavoie. I've been practicing in my head and went against my instinct there. So today's guest is Seb Lavoie, and I'm really excited to have this guest. I know this is very new form to you. You've never done podcasts really, so I'm just kidding. You're all over the place on podcasts. You're a constant speaker in terms of people seeking out wisdom and seeking out practical ideas on how to gain resilience in areas. And that's why I really wanted you on this podcast. So yeah, you're in terms of podcasts, you're an old hat at this, and you kind of guest spot and guest star quite often on a podcast I'm a big fan of, which is The Collective. And so, yeah, it's really awesome to have you on, and I'm honored to have you on, Seb.
Yeah, thanks, brother. I'm glad to be here.
Sometimes when I talk to folks like yourself, the intro can go because it's like you've done so many things, like the career highlight package is pretty long. So let me see if I can try to rein this in a little bit. Okay, so you served in the Canadian Armed Forces. You're a retired Sergeant Major of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. You have a 20-year career in the police force there in Canada, doing a wide range of different things, from general duty to SWAT operator to air marshal for Canadian Air Carrier Program, team leader, and chief warrant officer. I'm sure there's some other things in there professionally that I'm missing. And then also Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. That's incredible to be able to have that just in your repertoire as well. So yeah, anything that I'm missing, Seb, like what am I missing in terms of your career trajectory there?
No, that's essentially it in a nutshell. I spent about 16 years in tactical space. I've spent most of my career in that field, and that's essentially why I joined in the first place. So as soon as sort of the ship has sailed and I was looking at the prospect of doing something else, I decided to leave the force, and, had a great career and a great time and did everything I ever wanted. And now I'm coaching and having fun with life.
That's awesome. And so for those of you who are just listening in on Spotify or Apple Podcast, I encourage you to go and look at the video of this either on Spotify or YouTube just for a moment. And we're going to get your comments in the comment section. Whose mustache is better? I've already conceded that Seb's is better. It's far more pronounced today. And mine is just kind of, it looks like it woke up on the wrong side of the bed. So you're the winner here. That's my vote, but those in the comment section, they can vote as well. Yeah. So Seb, I've listened to several of your podcasts just in studying for this and researching for this episode, but also, like I said, I was aware of you a little bit before even reaching out to you to see if you were willing to come on, because I had heard you on other shows or other episodes. And so I really liked your take on things. And I think what I don't get often is, even in my research this week, is your backstory. I don't know your backstory very much, like from childhood, your upbringing and experiences you've had that kind of helped you mold into becoming this guy that you are today. And so, yeah, if you don't mind starting off with that, let's talk about your backstory a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot and very little at the same time, I guess. So I was born and raised in Montreal, which is on the east coast of Canada. I was the result of a encounter between a 15-year-old and a tiny bit older man. My mom was 15 when she got pregnant, and I came to be in 77 when she was 16 years old. And I was raised by a single mom. I had two sisters that used to live with their dad, and eventually further in life, they would come and live with us. I had what we could qualify, I guess, as a very adversity-ridden younger years. And so my youth was extremely, extremely sort of adversity-ridden, which was a good thing in the end, because it made me the man that I am today, at least partially. At about, I would say 16 or 17, post years where I was lost, in your teenage years and you're pretty lost, I started really sort of target fixating and becoming a law enforcement officer and or military. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, simply because we knew very little about those two fields anyways, and I didn't have a man in the picture. My dad, never was in the picture, so I never really knew what would be best for me, but I knew I wanted a life of service. I mean, I was bullied extensively as a youth, and it got me into a space where I was wanting to interfere with that as opposed to recreate it, which is a route that sometimes people might take. I was the complete opposite of that. I very early in life decided that I was gonna object to this, and that I was going to be there for others, as nobody had been there for me during sort of my years as a youth, as a mixed race youth in a province where that was not very much accepted or frequent, to say the least, especially in my neck of the hood. But yeah, so eventually by the time I was 18, I joined the Canadian Forces. I did nothing of importance in the Canadian Forces. I mean, I didn't deploy anywhere. I didn't, the only thing that it did for me was to create sort of an inner resilience and really understanding that for as long as I don't quit, I can do anything I set my mind to. So it was a good revelation for me, and it certainly created and helped me tremendously over the years, but it wasn't something, it wasn't something that I was able to engage in, say, like the folks post 9/11, for example. And so in 2001 or in 2000, I joined the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I graduated in 2001, and I went from there. And the rest of my career is history, as you eloquently put it earlier.
That's a lot, Seb. So mixed race, like you said, facing racism, bullying, but also this is interesting. It seems like folks that grow up with that situation with a father that's not around, they go in an opposite direction. They go in a direction of where that abandonment, and it stimulates victimhood and entitlement later on down the line. And so you decided you're going to focus in another direction. You're going to focus to not be that way, but to be present in your life, present in people that you care about's life, and that sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of factors that are influencing the path that somebody would follow later. I mean, it's anything that we try to break down and have some sort of certainty is going to fail miserably, because there is no such thing as certainty when it comes to these types of circumstances, and everybody kind of reacts differently. I think that everyone has the potential to react as a victim, and as far as control goes over your fate and control goes over the things that you are wanting to achieve, there couldn't be a more destructive approach to problem solving this little thing called life as being in victimhood, being at the mercy of absolutely everything that hits you, and without launching into a long diatribe, then you get cognitive bias, and you get all kinds of things coming in line with that are manifesting itself through your life. And so you become victim again and again and again, and you're wondering why you can't escape that cycle. And so for me, thankfully, my mom, even though she was very young, even though she was imperfect, so am I today. She was, later in life, she would be a therapist, and there was a lot of these conversations that we would have. So there's a lot of things we didn't have. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have, a nice place to stay. We didn't have all the clothes that I wanted. But what we did have is an incredibly strong relationship and conversations all the time. And those conversations really help steer sort of my way of thinking. And so I can thank her for that. And I wish I could take the credit for absolutely everything in my life. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But we know how destructive this approach can be. So for me, this turned out to be exactly how it should have turned out.
And so your mom played a huge role. I even heard you talking about her in another interview where there's an experience you had with her and seeing law enforcement, and that's kind of sowed the seed for you of this is a direction I want to go in life. So it sounds like she's had a huge impact on your life. Also going into the mental health realm of therapy and stuff like that is pretty cool. So who came in as the male figure to fill that spot? Was there anybody?
Not really. I mean, there were a few, and I think part of the issue is, just imagine being 15 and or being 20 and you have a 5-year-old now, what do you know about life and how to negotiate relationships and make sure that you have the healthy boundaries and healthy relationships. All of those things, of course, are lessons that are generally learned much later in life. And so, as a result of that, I don't think it would be fair for me to expect anything different. There was a lot of come and go, and there was a lot of meaningless relationship, as far as mom was concerned. And those relationship, of course, had an impact on me as a youth. And some of those men had various level of engagements with me, and some of them did, better than others. But the reality was this was a two people operation, me and
Mm,
mom, and anybody who came along was merely temporary in nature and often didn't stick around very long.
mm. It almost seems like it would make it so much harder, right? Something coming in and convoluting the two-man team that you have, the safety zone that you have there, and then someone coming in and shaking things up. And if there's any that you felt like was a good connection and then they're gone again, then almost re-triggering that abandonment.
hmm Yeah, it was really interesting for me because I found myself developing an incredible amount of resilience as opposed to falling back into destructive patterns, which of course
Mm,
was subconscious because I wouldn't have had any control over that at the age at which I was. But thankfully, it seems as though for me, I got so used to be disappointed that disappointment no longer bothered me.
mm,
And if disappointment doesn't bother you as an 8-year-old, what is that going to do for you as an adult? You know, and for me, it was an extremely powerful tool, a very empowering tool. Now, if you would ask me, would you change anything about this? The answer is no, because of the end result and the product. Was it easy? Absolutely not. And there were a lot of disappointments prior to my body saying, okay, disappointments is just a part of life, and I've been disappointed several times before, and I'm still here and I'm still doing the thing and nothing's changed. And so, those are very interesting dichotomies, so to speak. Is would you go back and remove the adversity from a person's life and expect the outcome to be similar? Because it can't happen. And we see it with, helicopter parenting, and we have an entire generation that did fantastically well. And next thing they know, they look at their kids and they're like, well, look, I'm going to do everything I can so that you don't face any of the hardship or the adversity that I've faced so that you can experience life in a much different way.
mm.
And I always ask my clients or the people I talk to, do you think that adversity had anything to do with the person you are today? And the answer is always yes. So now you want to remove it completely from your kid's life, right? Because that's going to work out exactly
Mm.
like you want it to. And of course, we know that that's not the case. So again, a very complex sort of set of circumstances. What do you do? And so there is no going back. So that's not an issue. And the lessons learned and the mechanisms, the protection mechanisms, as well as the coping mechanisms that it provided me, make me appreciate and be grateful for those experiences.
All right, just a quick pause. Firstly, I want to thank you. I want to thank all the people that have been subscribing. The show has grown. So I have a 1-week challenge for you, the listener, to do something daily that's going to put yourself in a situation to fail or be rejected or do something that sounds miserable in a good way. Don't be vague about this challenge. Sit down, write it down with a pen and paper, and it's likely something that you want to already do for yourself. This could be asking out that barista that you think is cute. This could be taking a cold plunge every day or a cold shower. This could be like calling up people that you need to reconcile with or ask forgiveness from. This could be just starting up that daily practice that you've wanted to do for a long time, like journal and prayer. This could mean going and getting that free trial at the nearest jiu-jitsu class. This could mean getting creative in the kitchen and trying different meals and different ideas. Or it could mean just meal prepping. So there are a ton of different things that you can do that helps build up your ability to take on normal misery and become more resilient. And if you already did this challenge last week, then go ahead and start a new challenge or continue to progress off the challenge that you did last week. For example, if it was trying to run a further distance than you've ever ran, you can continue to progress that forward. Or if it was something else from an exercise perspective, like doing 500 push-ups a day, you can progress that to then 550 or 600 push-ups a day. Or you can just take on something totally new that you're interested in. The number one rule is this can't cause lasting harm to yourself or someone else. So don't do anything stupid. this all has to be based in the idea of building yourself up in a healthy way, which leads into the second rule, which is this has to push up against your avoidance. This has to push up against something that you're avoiding to do for yourself. Again, that is healthy for you. That's the challenge. Let's keep normalizing the idea of chasing failure, seeking it out, and pushing ourselves in ways that we never thought was imaginable. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah, I don't know if there's a person that could be defined as resilient who would answer that question any different. Would you take back the past? It seems like every time there's somebody whose word is worth their weight in gold, right? Whose word is of value and significant, when they're asked that question, they always say no, like it's what shaped me. And I can reflect on the same thing, in terms of addictions and other sorts of stuff. It would be like, yeah, that's what shaped me. I needed that. Now, would I want that for my kids? Absolutely not. Right? Like, would I want my kids messing around with meth? Please, no. But yeah, but for me, it's like, yeah, those sorts of challenges were the things that were the stepping stones for me to continue to grow and get better and evolve my mind,
And, the kids, in all fairness, like the kids will have their own challenges, and that's kind of what's interesting is we can't project these things because the circumstances will always be different. And so, but what we do know for sure is they'll experience their own level of adversity. So I think that for us to be leading by example, because our words mean nothing, our actions mean everything when it comes to parenting. And when they're getting older in life, having these conversations about some of the lesson learns and some of the adversity that we went through is really going to help shape the persons that they are when it comes to adversity in their own lives. And so, I always tell people this, it's like, yeah, it's okay to be compassionate and really want to be there for somebody that's going through a hard time, but don't make it yours. Hold your space, because if you make it yours, then you'll make it yours in addition to yours, and again, those will be exacerbated. You'll be compounded, right? So it's a fine balance, but hey, man, nothing's perfect, right?
Yeah, you said a lot there, but I think if we were to kind of skip back a little bit, because I know you said you didn't want to go on a big sort of tangent or diatribe about it, but I do want to give you space to talk about this a little bit, that early kind of racism experience that helped, I guess, like you're saying, helped evolve you into the person that you are now. You talked about something important where you talked about, the cognitive dissonance or the cognitive biases that it can create for you in terms of the narrative that is shaping your worldview, your reality. And then this experience happens to me, therefore it is because of this reason. I'm tethering these bad experiences because of this thing that happened over here.
Yeah. And it's a very valid point, because there's actually a lot to it. And, a lot of the times when you're having these conversations about ownership as opposed to victimhood, people don't understand that you can be a legitimate victim of something. Like, you can be a victim of racism. You can be a victim of an assault. You can be a victim of abuse. You can be a victim of a variety of different things without being a victim. What you do with that is the difference, and there's a quote that says, life is about 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. Well, that's precisely the case. When it comes to victimhood, it's easier for me to take ownership of absolutely every moving part that I can control to make sure that I don't end up victimized again. And if I optimize myself, the chances of that happening are extremely slim. But nowadays, it's frowned upon to suggest something like this. How dare you? This is victim shaming. No, it's not victim shaming. That's empowerment. That's you regaining the tools that you need to get yourself out of the predicament that you're in. And you need to believe that you have those internal tools. They're dormant, and you need to tap into them, and you need to believe that you have them. And so for me, the question was answered quite quickly. I was tiny. I was probably, I don't know, 4'8", in high school. And I was very, very small. I was probably 110 pounds, maybe until I was probably 15 or something. And so for me, eventually what would happen is there was a growth spurt in there. There was martial arts being practiced on the regular, and I started lifting weight. and I started hitting the heavy bag, and I started doing all of those things, developing my mind also, how to communicate with people. How was I communicating? Was there anything I could have done better? Is there anything I did that was infuriating to people? So I started really on a path of introspection, which has remained the main primary travel path during my entire life, because introspection actually leads you to all the answers that you need. But you need to be willing to flip the stones that are ugly, and you need to be willing to engage in things that are going to make you extremely uncomfortable and essentially expose you, because the only way to address anything is exposure. And so for me, in allowing myself the grace of going through a timeline and trying to establish what are some of the behaviors that were contributing to my problems, so to speak, I knew that if I fixed all of my problems and all of the input that I have in a certain situation, it's very unlikely that situation is going to have as much power as it used to have. And so, by the time I came back to high school, a new kid with some muscles and some ability to fight and a different mindset and the ability to communicate and the ability to de-escalate and the ability and a bit more self-confidence in the sense of self-worth, all of the things that I worked on so that I could come back and prevent these situations from reoccurring. Now, did I have to make a categorized point at one point, because somebody was going to try it anyways, just to test the waters and see if this gauntlet could continue into my high school years. And of course, I took care of business on the spot, and I'm not a person that promotes violence to deal with things, but unfortunately, I spent a lifetime learning that sometimes violence is inevitable in order to get out of certain situations. And so I don't have a utopian view. And if you've never been faced with evil, or if you've never been faced with people that understand nothing but that, then it's easy to virtue signal on those that have. But just remember that as we are standing here today, you and I having this conversation, had it not been for soldiers getting down on the beach, and doing the thing, we wouldn't be here having the freedom of doing that. And so it's really, really important that all of the avenues are explored prior to this. But really, at the end of the day, we know that some people just will not learn. And so for me, it was as a kid that had an extremely, I would say, compassionate demeanor and a big heart. Hurting people, even people that were trying to hurt me, was going completely against the fabric of my personality and against the fabric of me as a youth. And so it took me some introspection, but also the realization that, hey, if you continue on this path, you are going to fight your entire life to even muster a little bit of respect or even have a little bit of value in this society or in this game called life. And so for me, a decision was made that I would no longer be a victim, that I would stop the cycle by any means necessary. And so I put in the work, over summer, over the winter, everything. And I came back to I came back to school with a different mindset and sort of ready to make the world known that the days of victimizing this youth was over. And that's sort of what happened.
Yeah, I think it's an important point because, of course, like there are people who are victims, and then it's almost like the evolution of not doing anything about it turns into victimhood, or the result of not doing anything about it turns into victimhood, or this mindset. And like you said, the way that can continue this narrative and this path for you going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very easy trap to fall in. And doing the work is extremely difficult. Not doing the work is extremely difficult. So when I have to pick between two difficult things, I will pick the thing that's better for you.
That's such a good point, man. It's like avoidance is still hard when you know you should be doing the opposite.
100%. And to a certain extent, it can be harder because when you are taking actions to manifest the person that you want to be, your self-worth is grounded in reality. You are taking action. So the alternative is to project a certain image in the sake of self-preservation, and that image be inaccurate of who you are as a person. So now what does that do? Well, it flares up insecurities. It flares up, your fears. It flares up anxiety. It flares up all of those things. So engaging in a process, a gauntlet and a gogi, so to speak, in Spartan terms, that would get you on the other side a completely different human being with extended capabilities to deal with the hardship of life is a gift, but you need to make that choice, and it's a tough pill to swallow, and it's a tough endeavor to engage in.
Okay, so we're still just starting the episode, and I already got 3 reels out of this episode. Like, I mean, bro, like, come on, that was good. That was good just now. That was so important what you just said. Okay, I wanted to discuss this because I know, people that follow you on Instagram, they're aware of the leg injury, they're aware of the amputation, and those who follow you, those who don't follow you won't know this about you, but how you just kind of went through that with grace and then evolved relatively quickly, like, okay, let's get on with life now. And so that's this really cool story, but I never really heard the story of how that even came about. Like what took you to this place to where you had this elective surgery to amputate?
Mm-hmm. So in August of 2021, I had a very minor surgery in my calf compartment. Later that night, I started developing quite a bit of pain in there, but because I have a pretty good pain threshold, I was just assuming that this was normal as a result of the surgery I'd underwent earlier that day. It turned out it wasn't. I had compartment syndrome, which is a condition that can be triggered by surgery. It's extremely rare, but it's a condition where your muscle inside the fascia starts swelling to the point where it exceeds the capacity of the fascia, and now all of your nerves and blood vessels and arteries and everything are constricted to the point where blood flow is completely cut. And for me, I was in compression for about 26 hours. So during that 26 hours, I killed my left calf muscle, essentially. And so over the course of between August and October of 21, I had 9 surgeries to remove dead tissue. They call that debridements. So I had debridements done over the course of 9 surgery just to remove dead tissue as I was going along. And as luck would have it, I had about 10% left of my calf muscle after, which severely limited my capacity to engage in life in the way I love to do it, which is, full speed ahead, so to speak. And so eventually, after 2 years of recovery and really investing and engaging in that recovery process with all of the modalities, I never sat there and waiting for my leg to get better. I was proactively engaged in 5 or 6 hours of work to recover every single day. And if I worked, I would work around my work and essentially really invest in that process to optimize my chances of getting better. And after 2 years, my functionality was still horrible and the pain was constant. And so I knew that if I get a prosthesis, I can probably increase my functionality by 40, 50, maybe 60%. The pain should be the same or very close. It might even be better. And I'll be able to engage in life, full bore, which is precisely what I wanted. So I started sort of shopping around for surgeons because not everybody was on board with my plan, especially civilian doctors that didn't really understand the mindset behind the man. But as luck would have it, and I would say the universe probably had something to do with this, I ended up with, are you familiar with Mark Omrod? From a Reorg, like the triple amputee that's been on the collective as well. He's a triple amputee, the first triple amputee in the UK during the Afghan campaign. And Mark Omrod had a excellent surgeon. The surgeon was the head of special operations surgery in the Air Force, and that surgeon moved to Canada. And so I ended up scoring him by some twist of fate. And it was an incredible turn of event. And when I had a conversation with him about what I intended to do and why, he said, "Say no more, man. I've been around guys like you my entire life. Like, I know exactly what's going to happen if I say no or if I discourage you from doing it." He said, from a surgeon's perspective, it's important to understand that generally when people go the elective amputation loop, we see it as a medical failure. We weren't able to fix you enough so that you could go out and engage in life. And now we have to remove the limb, which for us as surgeons is a failure. And so that is the reason why you've gotten resistance from everybody else. But he's like, I know guys like you, I know what you intend to do. I know it's not getting any better, so let's do it. And he did a fantastic job. And I was able to, re-engage in life right after, essentially.
And so how's that prediction? You said 50 to 60% of getting back to where you were and all those sort of things. How was that prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty accurate. My functionality is probably roughly, I don't know, 65% or 60% or 70% of what it used to be. And you have to there has to be a little bit of grace there because I was a tactical athlete and I was an athlete my entire life. And so, my functionality pre all of this was an unreasonable benchmark. It was an unreasonable bar. So I can't set that for myself and be like, okay, well, as long as I'm 80% of what I used to be, which was a super athlete, essentially,
Mhm.
it's not fair nor reasonable. And so I had to really adjust my expectations. And just as I would if I hit the mats as a black belt, if I hit the mats and one of the purple belts has had 3 rounds to rest and I've been going on and I'm exhausted, I need to manage my expectations instead of shying away from getting into the role, right? And those that
Mhm.
have engaged in jiu-jitsu before any martial arts will understand that. Those who haven't, you're missing out. You should. But so for me, it was a sort of a realization that, hey man, you're gonna have to adjust your expectations of yourself, and you're gonna have to also be grateful for the fact that for 40 years of my life, not a single human being beat me in a sprint, for example, right? And
Mhm.
so when you look at things like this, you got two choices. You can say, "Oh my God, poor me. I've been super fast my entire life, and now I'll never get to sprint again." Or you can look at it and say, "Who else hasn't lost a foot race in 40 years? Like you were lucky to have that." And I strongly believe that those were some of the anchors that anchored my attitude when it came to sort of what I was going to do next. Now, add to this other factors such as being multidimensional. I was never defined by my physical fitness. I was never defined by being a cop. I was never defined by being a military, a law enforcement officer or a tactical operator. I was never defined by any of those things. Those things were just parts of who I was. But it was so multidimensional that if I lost one of those things, I could really invest in the rest of the things that made me me. And so I started taking on the language. I started a master's degree. I did, a gazillion different things that I felt could have been improved upon earlier, but the opportunity necessarily wasn't taken. Whereas now I
Mhm.
had an opportunity to really dive deep into this. So again, in the concept of it, when you're looking at it subjectively, you got two choices here. You turn into a victim and woe's me, or you take the lead on this and tie up a white belt and go out and engage in life in all of the different things that you've been putting off, that you've been wanting to do. And so I saw that as an absolute opportunity to round myself up, and it was.
Yeah, I think that's such important input, not just like for those out there that may be facing an amputation, but like those with a significant injury of any type. For me in jujitsu, just ruptured my ACL. I do ultra running, so 100 milers and that sort of thing. And then we had a birthday roll where I just got to play around with everybody over and over and over. And I went to toss a guy after I don't know how many minutes, 10 plus, maybe 15 minutes of rolling straight. And that knee just pop when I planted on it and went to throw. He put his foot in front of mine, went to counter and pop, and it was a weird kind of deceiving injury because the pain was super minimal, like very little pain, but I could tell my balance was off. Something was, and went to after finally getting the MRI and finally having that diagnosed, could see, okay, in spite of all of the sort of things I'm trying to do to fix this knee, it's not going to get fixed and without surgery. And so now I'm on like a wait list for surgery. And I guess the hurricane out here just took out one of the major IV bag distilleries. So I'm going to be on a longer wait list, but here I
Mm.
am complaining to somebody who just had an amputation. So violins going on in the background. But the point is though, like I recognized early on, I'm like, okay, well, I can't just sit here and be depressed about this. So I can still lift. I can still do upper body work.
Mm.
I can still even do somewhat, maybe like 3/4 squat level work to try to help manage or maintain some sort of muscle in the area around the damage. I can still do certain things from a physicality standpoint. Like I can't tomorrow. I'm going to attempt to go ruck. We'll see how that goes. But I can't do like, I can't, and I could deadlift decently, but I can't do, deep squats, barbell squats, things like that. So some things are taken away. Not everything's taken away. The running is completely taken away, which I hate running, but I do it for the mental health side of it. I do it for the resilience side of it. But I'm like, okay, now I have where I would take 5 hours on a Saturday, go and run. Well, I have all this time on a Saturday. I have all this other stuff. My mom's been asking me forever to I do some woodworking here and there to make her this butcher block thing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make my mom this butcher block thing. She's been asking for forever. I got some other stuff. And now we got all this other sort of projects where I'm like, okay, I got to take this active mind and put it into something creative. Just lifting weights, just resistance training isn't going to do it for me. I need to start getting creative with this time. And so now I got my kids on this PE program. I got all this sort of, I'm running my 10-year-old through a biology class that's appropriate for his age and like doing all this sort of, like I'm getting real creative with the time that I have. And that's keeping me from going crazy, and it's actually evolving me in areas where maybe I'm not a white belt, but maybe I'm a blue belt or a brown belt, but those areas have been sitting long enough. They need to be put back into my life,
100%, man. I couldn't agree more. If just on a side note for the people going through the hurricane here, and I'm really sorry for your losses, and all of the devastation is absolutely unfathomable, and I hope that things are resolved on short order here, because I can only imagine. And I mean, that's just us looking at it from the outside. And with the wheels meet the pavement, things are always a lot more difficult. And I know that this has been absolutely atrocious, including the response. And so my thoughts and prayers certainly with everybody that's going through this. But you are correct, man. We're gonna get hit. That is an absolute certainty. If there's one thing that is certain, is you are going to get hit with adversity. Now, you wouldn't dream of your favorite sports team showing up anywhere unprepared and untrained, but yet we expect to rise to the occasion when we get hit with major adversity without engaging necessarily in things that challenge us to the core, practicing said resilience. And so for me, everything that happens that isn't catastrophic, or everything that happens that I sort of self-impose, like being uncomfortable and going for an ultra, do all of those things, it serves the purpose of preparation for adversity. When adversity does hit and you are constantly challenging yourself, you're constantly reframing smaller adversity, what you are doing is teaching yourself that adversity is just a part of life, not the end of it, that you're going to come on the other side in one way or another. And so I truly believe that having the ability to immediately set your sights on something and have an end goal in mind or an outcome in mind will help you take the steps necessary to action those things. And while you're actioning things, you have a lot less time to just overthink, to go down rabbit holes, to sit back and depreciate or decrease your physical fitness because you're not engaging in life, you're not doing the things you should be doing, and compounding all of your issues. So it's really easy to fall into that sort of whirlwind that is going to sweep you off your feet. And the problem with that is that eventually you're going to get to a point where it's absolutely impossible for you to know what cause and what are the cause and effect and what is all intertwined in here. The memory is highly defective. Memory serves one purpose, and that's to ensure survivability. So what memories cares about is two things. If something bad happens to you, it will magnify it to make sure it never happens again. If something good happens to you, it will magnify it to make sure that you re-engage in behaviors that bring you the oxytocin, the serotonin, and the dopamine, pleasure hormones. And so we know that memory is extremely inaccurate, doesn't serve the purpose of remembering things accurately, quite to the contrary. And then at the end of that, you're going to, have all these events and all these things that you've had various reactions to. And now you're going to go talk to somebody that's cognitively biased, even though they're trying not to be. They have their own lens on life, and they're going to look at your world, try to evaluate where it's gone wrong. And there's so much intertwined in there, and everything is so interconnected that it's almost impossible to do. So you can go to talk therapy for 6 years, but it's going to be very, very difficult to untangle this. And I think that's something that people tend to forget. They're looking for single source of problems when really, generally, mental wellness or the lack of is an exacerbation or a compounding of all of those different factors. And so, really taking actions and moving forward and doing so with intent is the difference between essentially becoming a victim of this or regaining control over a loop.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Mm.
I think people will hear what you just said and feel likely motivated by it. Like, yeah, let's get to work. Let's do it. But how do they start? That's one of these things. You can listen to really, really good speakers and they're good speakers because they've lived it out. They've done it. You listen to, one of the early David Goggins interviews on Rogan or something, right? And you're like, man, I think even Rogan said it on there, like famously, like, I feel like I could run through a brick wall right now. and that's good. And then that's going to last a few hours and then you're back to you. And so let's talk about how to, from a practicality standpoint, how does one start? So when you're working with businesses or you're working with individuals, how does one start to build up this thing that we call resilience or start to oppose this thing called victimhood that we've been talking about so far? How does one even begin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting that you say that most people are going to want to run through a brick wall and other people have already shut down this podcast. The fact is you can't help anybody who doesn't want to be helped. Is that simple. So we all know if you have a family member that's in drugs or they have their own challenges and you want to help and you love them and it would be very meaningful for you to engage in this. But if they're not prepared for your help and if they're not prepared for you and the work that has to be done, because let's call a spade, no predicament that you find yourself in that's difficult in life isn't going to take a lot of hard work. And quite to the contrary, and a lot of people, I think, deflect that responsibility to others, to external factors, to people that have, degrees and letters in front of their names or that kind of stuff. The reality is you are responsible to flip the tide. You are. Nobody else is. And there's going to be a ton of hard work that needs to be done. And so it really depends. There is no one cookie cutter answer when it comes to establishing what the strategic priorities are going to be. So having the conversation with the person and really understanding where they're coming from and where they're at from a mental and emotional standpoint is critical. I may have a conversation like I'm not a big fan of big pharma, for example, right? I'm not a big fan of psych meds. I'm not a big fan of any of those things because they can kill somebody's soul. But also, if somebody has self-harming propensity at the moment, this might be the best option for now until you start lining up other things. And so I think that it's really important to keep, to have the ability to critically analyze the individual set of circumstances to understand exactly what step needs to be done. So there is no cookie cutter answer. But if I was to give you something that generally can really help, it all starts with introspection. Introspection is a difficult endeavor, especially if you've been burying things in little drawers and lock them up and thrown away the key. It might be very difficult. And that is where technical knowledge, such as somebody that can assist in talk therapy and those types of things, there's a variety of other modalities that you can engage in. Let's call a spade. But we're talking about, okay, run of the mill, what am I doing right now, So some of the things that are critically important is we know that he who has a why can bear almost any how. Okay. So what are you here for? What do you want to do? What lights your soul on fire? What are you passionate about? Those types of things. If you haven't tied your life to the things that light your heart on fire, it's difficult to motivate for absolutely anything. And there is a conversation to be had about motivation versus sacrifice or self-discipline, right? Self-discipline is longer lasting than motivation, but motivation can be helpful. And what motivation is, and most people don't know this, is a hormonal response. It's essentially, adrenaline and epinephrine. That's all there is to it. And so if you engage in taking the actions that are contributing to you becoming a better version of yourself and becoming better, you are going to get these inject of dopamine and epinephrine and, and you are essentially going to be motivated. And so it's easier to motivate. Think about going to the gym, especially in the first 6 months. If you have somebody that's never trained religiously and you start training seriously, in 6 months, you're going to be a different person. 5 years later, that change will be a lot slower, a lot more incremental. And so now it's going to be a little bit more difficult because you're going to have to set your sights on maintaining or perhaps improving ever so slowly, which is a little bit harder to motivate for. But when it comes to making some life changes that are going to change the direction and the course of your life, I cannot think of anything more meaningful than that. Think about engaging in this full bore and think about the prospect of doing research and understanding all of the things that you don't know anything about. And where do you start? It doesn't matter. Start somewhere. Start somewhere. Understand how vibration affects your everyday life, how connecting with nature affects your everyday life. Learn about the pillars of resilience. Learn about the modalities that are engaged in those pillars. Learn about how you can, without spending an exorbitant amount of money, that you can implement some of those wellness mechanisms in your everyday life to really transform your reality. And more importantly, believe wholeheartedly that you have absolutely everything you need at this moment to make that happen. And trust me on this. I've heard a lot of people give me the old sub stories, or I'm not ready, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. And every single time they were wrong. We have that, and it is available to be tapped into. What it needs is will and engagement, and it needs to be done right now. Beat the iron while it's hot and go for brokes. What is it that you want for your life? Do you want anything meaningful? Do you want anything worth talking to your grandchilds about? Do you want anything that's going to make the adversity of life bearable? Because if that's the case, you got work to do. Roll your sleeves up and get the going,
Here's the other edge or side of the coin. Maybe I would have known this one personally. And I think that a good way to frame this is the way you talked about having a high threshold for pain. I do too. And so I could resonate with, if I was in that situation with the surgery, I would do exactly what you did. I'd just be like, hey, it's gonna kind of be okay. It's gonna figure itself out. The pain will go away at some point. And just spend way too much time not in action, but just like I can deal with the pain. So on the other side of the coin, here's a starting point, but where is the ending point? Where is the stop sign versus the yield sign in terms of somebody who is highly resilient and they're doing a particular act or it could be running, it could be whatever. They have something, school, whatever. I don't know what it is, but whatever their thing is that their particular goal set has shifted toward at the moment. Is there a stop sign in that moment? Like, is there ability to say, this is no longer working. I need to either yield or I need to push through. So like I'm at this moment where I've put everything I can. I've tried to figure out everything I can. I've lined up everything so that it will work. And still, I think I've hit my plateau or I've hit my place where life just isn't going to allow me to do this at this moment. So how do I flex accordingly? Or do I keep just pushing and say, F it, like, let's keep going?
The answer is it depends. Right? It depends. And I will bring some ownership back on the person and say, like, when a person says, I've tried everything, I've done everything I could, I've lined up everything, I want to know what everything is. I want to have that conversation because I can guarantee you one thing. You didn't.
Yeah.
You did not.
Yeah.
You didn't. Right? And so, and it's gonna be real quick for me to dismantle that argument and show you things that you could have done that you didn't do, or things that you didn't research because your mind was closed. And this is important to understand. When you are seeking to get better, when you are seeking to elevate, when you are seeking to be a different human being, having a closed mind isn't going to work. It never does. You need to have an open mind. You need to look at all of the modalities. And even if something, elicits a visceral reaction in you on account of you think that it's either BS, or that it's never going to work, or that somehow it's probably not real. You need to do your research properly, and you need to address it with an open mind, objectively, so that you can start looking at things that other people might be frowning upon. We all have these people in our lives, that are complaining constantly about mental wellness and the lack of, and how their life is a certain way and all this good stuff. And then if you ask the questions, have you been eating nutritious food? No. Have you trained? No. Have you been outside? No. Did you connect with nature? Oh no, I don't do that. Okay, cool. Have you gone hiking for any other reason, not to connect with nature? No, I've never been hiking. I don't like to hike. I like the city. Okay, cool. So now you start dismantling the argument because you really haven't done anything. And say you're a city person, or you think you're a city person. Let me inform you of something. Humans were never meant to live that way. We weren't. And it's creating all kinds of issues for us. And when you go out in nature and you connect with nature, there's a million different things physiologically and otherwise that are getting involved in these systems, helping you clean up. And so for you to say frown upon or reject a prospect of something that could be done on account of, I just don't like doing it. Well, there's a lot of things I don't like to do, which includes working out, and a lot of people say to me all the time, oh, you love working out. No, I don't. I did it because I had to. It's that simple. It's not about loving it or not loving it. Does it need to be done? Period. Right. And so I think it's for someone. And then inversely, if you have gone down a route and you've done all the homework and you've truly put in a ton of work, and then something is missing. Something is missing, and you need to find out. And so you have choices. You can introspect deeper, or you can, if you surround yourself with the right people, which I always do, and I have very healthy boundaries. If you surround yourself with the right people, you may have a bunch of people around you that can help you see the light and elevate. But you need to have the conversations. But not just have the conversation, you need to have the conversations with the end goal in mind, to be told some things that you could be doing better. And that in itself is an affront to your ego. So you need to build up the capacity to receive feedback so that you may look at things differently. The problem is as you look at life through the same lens, you're going to come out with the same outcome. This is the definition of insanity. And this is why having the people around you to have the capacity to look at you, that know you enough to say, this and that and this other thing, provided, of course, that those people are people that you should be listening to, right? What have they done? How are they living their lives? Are they doing some of the things that you wish you could do? Are they engaging in life in a way that's very positive to you? And more importantly, can they be trusted to help you? And those are questions that you're going to have to answer prior to having these conversations. Now, there's another thing that we need to look at when it comes to having put in all the work and realizing that I might have hit a plateau or something, and that's called a pattern interruption. How do I create a pattern interruption? Because you may very well be engaging fully in something with all the best intentions in the world, but as you are negotiating it, you get to a point where you keep on getting in the same tracks all over again. And that's because the need for safety is so overwhelming for humans that you're generally going to take a track that leads to a very similar outcome. The problem is it's going to keep us uncomfortable and in precarious positions also. We need to understand that. But it's important to have a little bit of grace for ourselves and say, okay, I've done all of this work. I came a long way. What am I missing from a technical standpoint? Am I needing to, hire a coach? Am I needed to speak to my therapist again about a different angle? Am I to switch the angle by which I view the world so that I may look at my condition or at my circumstances differently? What are some of the things that I can do? You need to get, as Sean Taylor likes to say, and I know he was a guest on the podcast recently, you need to be curious about life. You need to be curious about the work that you are doing, and you need to keep seeking answers. And you'll find out that we live in an age of information where you can build essentially a nuclear bomb, watching YouTube. I don't suggest it, obviously, but you'll probably end up flattening your mom's house. But we know that information is out there and readily accessible. And so there's really no excuses as to why I'm not engaging 100% to try to learn as much as I can about the predicament that I'm in or some of the things that I'm trying to achieve. More importantly, when something causes a visceral reaction in me. So if I hear somebody speak and I have a negative reaction, so if somebody's listening to me today and every time I say victimhood, they get a pinch in the heart, that is an indication that you are on to something. If something creates a reaction in me, if somebody walks in the room and I feel threatened or I feel like I don't like them for whatever reason, instead of imposing that on them, I impose it on me. Why am I reacting this way to this person? What has that person done to me? Nothing. So why am I projecting whatever it is that I'm feeling inside on that person? And I want to get to the bottom of it, so I stop doing that, right? And so that's not to say that there's no place where intuition is giving you a warning sign, against someone. And if you're a professional in this field and you've spent a lifetime having to read people, you may be very, very good at it. It doesn't make it perfect and it doesn't make it 100% accurate. And so it's important to have that ability,
Yeah. And I think you just described very well roughly my definition of mental toughness, right? Which is the ability to adapt, the ability to flex accordingly so that you can continue on with whatever the trajectory is that you have in mind for yourself. But being rigid, closed-minded, that's going to cause you to fail, and not only fail, cause you to see yourself as like, well, it's not fair because this didn't happen, or I don't have these sort of privileges in my life, or whatever the excuse is. But the ability to adapt and flex accordingly seems to, for me, that's my definition of mental toughness, right?
It absolutely is. And that's exactly what resilience is, essentially. It's the ability to bounce back, but it's also the ability to negotiate different set of circumstances with a positive mindset. And when we talk about mission outcome or end goal or mission statement, the mission statement is the piece that's the constant. I want to be better. I want to be productive in my life. I want to be connecting with other human beings. And I want to be that person that elevates others and helps the collective and leaves a legacy of wellness and compassion in the world. If that's the end goal and if that's the mission statement, that stays and it's your constant. What is flexible, as you alluded to, is the mission execution phase of the operation, which is how you are going to achieve the end goal of the mission statement.
Yes.
And there's a gazillion different ways to do that. So do not, by any stretch of the imagination, fall in love with your own plan when it comes to negotiating the way in which you'll achieve your goal. And so if you are hitting your head on a wall 19 times in a row, and there is nothing from a technical standpoint that you can learn to make things better, then you need to be reevaluating whether or not that certain modality is actually beneficial to you. And if it's not, why or what else could be used as a result of that? But I think understanding that having a clear mission statement doesn't mean that you fall in love with your own plan and you keep pushing no matter what, because that's not the case. It's A, not realistic, and B, not productive whatsoever, right?
So when you're talking about like giving your kids the opportunity to fail, essentially, like giving your kids the opportunity to have challenge in their lives, and it kind of, as we move forward and kind of connect some of the dots of some of the things that you've talked about already, let's talk about failure for a second and the importance of it. I guess we don't have to hone in only on failure. We can, because one of my missions is to normalize failure for people. Like not only normalize it, but like seek it out versus just allow it to happen to you. But one of the things I'm interested in is when people fail, because they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
When they fail, what is the rebounding process? So I think about it like from an MMA perspective. There's a guy in early MMA, in the early UFC days, named David Terrell, who is this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, American kid from Stockton, California area, and was just destroying everybody. This guy, and he was a good-looking kid, just destroying everybody. And then, who is it? Evan Tanner just obliterated the kid, and he tried showing back up in the UFC, and he was never the same. Just like his career was over after Evan Tanner. Rest in peace, Evan Tanner. And then you have someone like Francis Ngannou, right? Who just got a massive knockout this weekend. And like the challenge that he had to do just to land himself in a gym in the first place, just to be able to get into a gym was incredible. His whole journey from getting out of Africa and I think he went into Morocco, into France, I think, if I'm getting, maybe I'm getting the places, but he had a little stop in there. And then he has this crazy journey where, you know, he rises up through the MMA world with very little challenge skill wise. Like nobody could match his skill. He just out talented everybody. And he put in the work. Don't get me wrong. He's massive, put in the work and put in the work on his hands and all that, but just extremely natural athlete. And then he raises to the highest echelons against Stipe and then gets destroyed by Stipe and embarrassed. And then his next fight is against, I think, Derek Lewis, not to go through this whole, you can tell I'm a fan of MMA, but then that was a terrible fight. And then it took him a while. And then all of a sudden he just started blowing people up again. And he became not only, he wasn't the same guy anymore. He was so much better. And when he faced adversity in the cage, he became so much better to where then he got, you know, people that follows Francis, they know he then went into boxing and probably technically beat the best boxer on the planet technically. And then, even though he technically lost, I guess, and then he lost in a boxing match, and then he comes back to MMA, knocks out the guy in the first round this weekend. This long journey, but you can see where it was Stipe Miocic to just embarrass the tar out of him in order for him to go back to the drawing board. In the middle of all that, he lost his son, which was terribly tragic, but not to go into this whole Stipe diatribe. But so the question is, failure is going to happen. So how does one who is already kind of naturally resilient in an area, like I want to say David Tyrell wasn't as resilient person, in order for him to get to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, he had to be resilient. You have to get tapped out millions of times before you get that black belt, right? You're getting destroyed on a regular occasion. But then it was this embarrassment on TV that seemed to be the end of him, if I were to look at it psychologically. So how does some not rebound in terms of who they were in that particular domain? They never become the same in that domain. And then how does some become better?
You know, it's a really interesting and extremely complex question, and it really is an individual assessment, right? Because it can be very complicated. But let's talk about, you know, a correlation I can make with, say, selections, whether it's police special operation or military special operation. What you are seeing some of the top people that have, you know, been good through their entire life, very athletic, worked hard, captain of the varsity team, this, that, and the other. And as soon as they're imposed something that remotely resembles failure for the first time in their life, they break down like piece of glass, never to return again. That's being seen over and over. Whereas a lot of people that are mediocre at everything will just keep trucking and keep going and keep doing the thing. And I think there is truly a disservice. Being very talented at something can be a disservice at times, especially if you necessarily haven't put in the work. So I'll give you an example, not to take anything away from Terrell, but say, for example, you're a BJ Penn and you have such a propensity to learn jiu-jitsu quickly that in 3 years you have a black belt and you are a world-class grappler. You know, I will surmise that this is not the same as being the nail being hammered on for 17 years to get your black belt, where you have built this resilience along the way, but you had so much skills and talent that you take for granted things that you've never had to work for. So now the issue is, if that's the case and it's part of your inner makeup and you go out and you get fully exposed, you have no idea what it means to work hard for it. You don't. Like, you may have worked, yes, I will give you that, but it's arguable that you worked as hard as somebody that had to, you know, beat themselves for absolutely everything they ever gotten. And so I think what's important here, and if you look at Ngannou's, for example, it's not so much how you feel about certain things, it's how you feel about what needs to be done. So when you look at a guy like Ngannou's, for example, and something that you said is very telling, every time he comes back from a defeat, he is better than he ever was. He has He has changed the way he operates. He has changed his game plan. He has improved his ground game. He is more conservative in his striking approach, and he's more defensive in a way, and taking less risk, or And so what he is doing is, when he faces a wall, he understands that the work it's incumbent upon himself to do the work, to be a different person, to bring challenges back to bear. Whereas somebody that's never had to work for much of anything, as soon as they have to put in hard work for anything, they will disable that. It's going to take me so long to be better on the ground. Say a person has a blue belt level. And quite honestly, man, sometimes I'm shocked at the UFC, at the level of some of the grounds of some of these guys. It's like, man, you're a blue belt at best, and you're in the best organization in the world. You are going nowhere. And it's that simple. And yeah, you may be a one-trick pony that has all these, extreme power and speed and accuracy, and maybe your striking is like top level and all this stuff. But man, if you have any chinks in your armor, you are not going to be a big deal in an organization like this, and we know that. And so a guy like Francis Ngannou, that's worked for absolutely everything he's ever had in life, including life itself, for him is just another day at the office. And everything is about context, and everything is about perception. When you say he was madly embarrassed by Stipe Miocic, it's like, well, wait a minute here. Dude, he stepped in a cage, locked the door behind him with a super heavyweight who's an absolute savage, and he did it in front of freaking 40 million people. Mm-hmm. Is that an embarrassment? And so everything has to be taken in context. I mean, it takes stones like no others to lock yourself in that cage and be prepared for the physical harm that is coming to you. It's one thing to go to work. It's one thing to get your jaw broken every time you go to work, and it takes, and I think from an outside perspective, for people that have never put the wheels to the pavement, it's easy to have utopian sort of idea of what this probably feels like and all of those things. But we know that interpersonal human aggression is the number one phobia in the world. It surpasses height and darkness combined. And so imagine the kind of courage that it takes for a human being to expose themselves, not only their weaknesses and everything else, but also to expose their shortcomings and expose themselves if they get caught, if somehow they don't, the other person gets lucky or the other person is better, all of those things. And so it takes an incredible amount of resilience to even accept the risks associated with that. And so for me, when it comes to the way you feel and what needs to be done, you need an acknowledgement for the emotions. This is how this makes me feel. I'm afraid, I'm scared, I'm afraid I'm going to fail again. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. I'm afraid of all those things. And then it's, what am I doing about it? What are the actions that I can take right now to be a different person when I re-engage in this game? And perhaps I need to be disappearing for a year, to go lay on my back and get guys in my guard and on my side and taking my back and do all of those things until you now have taken a shortcoming and you've made it something that's much more manageable and something that's much more palatable from a skill set standpoint. And now you return a different person. Mm-hmm. But in order for you to do that, you need two things. You need hard work, dedication, patience. Patience is critically important. You can't just go back in there just because you want to go back to past glory. For all maybe all the wins you had something to do with the fact that you're extremely talented. But now you start hitting, the upper tier fighters, and now you are going to be technical about how you're doing things. And you may need to change the way in which you train. You may need to change teams, or you may need to bring your team to another camp to see if there's anything that you guys are doing that's causing you issues in the realm. And it all depends, and it's all incumbent upon how important is this pursuit to you? Is this your why? Is this your purpose? Is this, and if the answer is yes, then you should cut no expenses and no effort to try to materialize this dream of yours. But I tell you what, a lot of people love a good fighter that can go in there and do the things and really put a stamp on thing and all this good stuff. Nobody knows what it takes to be in there. Nobody does unless you engage in that. And I think it's important to realize that even to make it to that level, how good you have to be to suck in the UFC. is absolutely unfathomable to most humans that think they'll just see red and fight, But it's all about, it really doesn't matter what happens. What are you going to do about it? What are the actions that you are going to take? And I can tell you, for me, if I don't take actions, that is where my anxiety and rabbit holes and things are percolating. They say that to beat anxiety, you need to get into exploration. If you've been worried about a paper you needed to write for the last year and you're procrastinating on it, you're compounding anxiety. Whereas if you start writing right now, and it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not or whatever, your anxiety lessens. And by the time that you start flowing and you start writing something that resembles a thesis that would be decent to read, you are now almost anxiety free in relation to that event. But there is one sure way to maintain anxiety and to maintain the status quo, and that's to not engage in this. And what's going to happen with a guy like Trailor, what I suspect might have happened or what could happen, is regrets. And regrets is something that you absolutely do not want to live with if you can avoid it, especially regret of catastrophic consequences, i.e., him returning to the drawing board, learning the things that he had done incorrectly and fixing those issues, only to go back and a couple of years later for the UFC to blow up and him being set for life from a financial standpoint, as well as just having some recognition if that's something that he was after, And so he's really missed that boat, unfortunately, because he didn't stick around. And so now, likely, if you were to have that conversation with him, he'd probably have a very different, unless, of course, you were never into it that much, but you just so happen to be very talented. It's not because you have talent for something that you necessarily want to engage in it wholeheartedly. Some guys just hate fighting. And if you hate fighting, I can't think of anything worse to do than MMA. I mean, it would be absolutely horrible. And so that's kind of my answer in a nutshell, man. You need to take action to make yourself into the person that you need to be, to do the things that you need to do, even though they came to you, say, fairly naturally up until now. The game has changed. What are you going to do? Eyes are on you. Are you going to pick yourself up, or are you going to, crawl away with your tail between your legs, so to speak, and only to live with regrets later? Or maybe you realize, I did well until this time, but I really don't want to put in the work to be that person because this isn't my why. And if that's the case, that's an absolutely acceptable course of action. But don't let cowardice and the fear of exposure make you do that. Make the willful choice to do that.
That would be the big thing, the fear of exposure, like you correctly pointed out there, like just to go and get in a cage, even if it's just on a regional scene, talk about the man in the arena sort of situation, like the ability to put yourself out there and just potentially be knocked out in some weird way where your body is stiffened up, and to be in that predicament that's so much courage just to do that. But yeah, so, and the way you're talking about stepping away for a year or stepping away and then kind of working on foundational things and then coming back, it reminds me of this. I'm not going to say the quote, not even attempt it because I'll mess it up, but it's a Winston Churchill quote or something to the effect of making sure you go out to the wilderness. Like leave to the wilderness and get yourself right before you show back up to the show, before you show back up. So yeah, what was I going to say? The next thing I was going to go over as we just kind of transition, because we're covering a lot of topics. And I appreciate your feedback, because what I would encourage people to do is, who are listening to this episode, come back and listen to it again, because there are nuggets, so many nuggets that are being shared right now in this episode where like I'm making notes to myself. And I'm like, there's no way we have enough time to break down it, because you share one thing and in 2 paragraphs, there's 4 massive takeaways that you can continue to expand upon. So I encourage people to listen to this episode again, because there's so many nuggets that are being dropped right now. Okay, so I don't know how it is in Canada right now, and this might be a topic. I'm actually glad I thought of this question when I was researching, because I couldn't I didn't hear you talking about this particular topic. Maybe you have in one of your thousands of episodes that you've done on podcasts, but I wanted to ask you about this and get your take on it. So in the US, there is, especially amongst young men, and partly due to a fellow Canadian named Dr. Jordan Peterson, there is a growing acceptance of spirituality and religion. And I have my sort of thoughts as to why that may be, but there seems to be this growing trend, and I love that it's happening, toward the acceptance of spirituality, faith, religion, whatever word you want to tag onto it. Some people are very afraid of that word religion, but whatever word you want to put on it, but this acceptance towards something bigger than themselves. Is that happening in Canada too? And what is your kind of thought process around it?
Yeah, I think we're slowly seeing a shift towards that as well, and I think it's quite easy. I mean, you look around. For me, words, words are one thing, but when you see actions correlated to some certain speech, so when you're looking at demonstrated behaviors, and those behaviors are either consistent or inconsistent with some of the thought, some of the more, what's the word? Like connecting processes, community or religion or anything organized that actually gives you an end goal of being a good person. Now, there's nothing wrong with religion. There's something wrong with humans. There's nothing wrong with jiu-jitsu. There's something wrong with practitioners. We all know that. And so guys as smart and probably one of the greatest mind of all time, Nikola Tesla, was very, very aware that spirituality and religion sought the same thing, that humans interfered with that process. But the reality was, at the core, there was something there. And I think that now what we have done is we've told young boys that you can't be a boy because that's toxic. You can't be here because that's this. You can't, everything you did and every wrong in the world is your fault. Everything. So now we've turned an entire subset of society as professional victims, and we turn an entire other subset of society as perpetrators, where those guys were never victims and those guys were never perpetrators, And so now essentially we're destroying them and cutting them at the knees before they can even launch in this little endeavor called life. And they have no idea how they're supposed to be. They're going to get canceled. They're going to get this. They're going to get that. It's like, so it's no wonder that there is such a propensity to be seeking something better, to be seeking something bigger that's going to help guide their sort of their actions in relation to life and how to negotiate life. Man, it is dramatic and catastrophic, some of the things that are going around, in our two countries, really, and elsewhere in the Western world. Now, keep in mind, we're 100 years away from World War II, the end of World War II, or, close to anyways. And so now what we're looking at is extreme comfort. We've been so comfortable for so long that we started fretting things that are inconsequential in the end. But because we haven't faced adversity in so long, and that having an 80-inch TV and a computer in our pocket has allowed us to share beliefs and do things quickly and get some instant gratification going, we have completely lost sight of hardship and having to work together, having a sense of community, working towards a similar goal, so to speak, and not have such divisive ideals that are consistently tearing us apart. And unfortunately, comfort isn't good for humans at all. When it happens, we take it for granted. And when we take it for granted, we start being complacent in the application of everything we do in life. And so what we're seeing right now is in my opinion, and I could be wrong, and certainly I'm very aware that there's nuances in that, but I feel like we've touched rock bottom as a society when it comes to empowering young men to go out and do the right things. We're also not giving them the whole picture. So I'll give you an example of this. Like, there's all these programs right now to overcome this, alpha this and alpha that, and come to my alpha camp and come to this and that. But what we're not doing is realizing that the majority of the leaders that we followed, think about Jocko, think about, I don't care who you want to name that's an inspirational leaders, those guys have a level of compassion that's really hard to match. And not once is emotional intelligence factored in this equation. Not once is introspection fitting in this equation. And so now what we have is people that are trying to bridge a certain gap, but all they're doing is waking up at 4:30, training hard, doing this, doing that. And then they go on Tinder, call themselves alpha, do all this stuff, meaningless relationship, all of this stuff. So there is a piece of that conversation that isn't occurring, that needs to be occurring for young men to understand that in order for you to live a healthy, fulfilled life that's productive, protective, and helping others, and navigate theirs and be a substantial help in society, it's a multifaceted approach to creating that person, and of that, compassion, empathy, emotional intelligence, all of those things, self-regulation, self-awareness, drive, determination, all of those things have to be factored in, and all of those things have to be sort of extrapolated on so that you can really be the person that you need to be. And so I'm not surprised to see that. And I think we're going to see much more of that, because what you are seeing is actions of a certain subset of society, which adheres to a certain belief, is now not nearly as lost as everybody else seemed to be. And so if you don't have anything in your life that serves as an anchor as to why you're doing certain things, eventually you can't fool yourself into thinking that you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. And now you're scratching, at everything that's coming by. So what we're seeing right now is exactly that. It's in my opinion, a repercussions of having hit rock bottom. And I think, and I'm hoping, as everything is cyclical in life, and a lot of the elements and the problems that we're seeing in society now have been seen before numerous times, and yet we're still here and we're still, moving forward. I think that we're going to see a pendulum switch, or a paradigm switch at the very least, that should lead to a better balanced approach. Now, one of the things that I don't like about humanity is that we are excessive. We go all out one way or the other, when the reality is most of the things that we need to be engaged in, and most of the things that we need to do to maximize and optimize our wellness, are in the gray area, not in the black and the white. Anything, even the most healthy things can be detrimental if you push them too far. So it's important to have a concept of balance, and being okay with having and seeking said balance. And I think that taking actions that are somewhere in the gray zone, as opposed to, I did all of this and it created this outcome, which I absolutely despise. So in order for me to change, I'm going to aim to be completely different and have, this completely different approach, which is likely to not work the way you want it to. Everything is an incremental step towards betterment, but everything is an engagement at various levels. But having a little bit more than surface level understanding of absolutely anything it should not be detracted. That is critically important. Having having a little bit more depth of understanding in any field of endeavors is going to help you. Trying to take something and make it the complete opposite is never going to help you. It's very hard to sustain. B, it's very difficult to do. And C, it generally doesn't yield the results that you want. And I think that we're seeing a shift now. And I to be frank with you, man, those were the last, 10 years here were terrifying for somebody that spent a lifetime, really engaging in life and helping others and doing all this stuff. It's been a terrifying prospect for sure.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit to maybe specifics or examples of how for you in the last 10 years there's been this kind of terrifying shift?
Well, let's take, and there's all kinds of controversial topics in here, but let's take like curriculum in schools, for example. When I was in the Lower Mainland, my kids didn't learn anything at all other than becoming a professional victims. That is all they learned, right? And they could select their sex because biology wasn't real, right? So now what we have is we completely disregarded the fact that critical thinking and consequential thinking in youth isn't even a part of the equation until like 20 to 25 years old, right? And so we realize that, and we tell them that they can't drink until they're 19. We tell them that they can't vote until they're 18. but we can tell them at 8 that it's okay to want to change sex because they're having an internal crisis. And internal crises are regular in humans. That's normal. And you will question your sexual orientation. You will question whether or not you're buying into the whole I'm a man or I'm a woman. You will question all of those things. You might even question, and those are very normal processes for almost all humans. But we also know that making life-altering, potentially catastrophic decision at such a young age, disconnecting the parents from even the rights to know, like, it is absolutely mind-blowing what's going on here. We tell our veterans that are suffering from mental illness to go get, and in the country here, there has been a few instances where veterans were told to essentially seek assisted suicide. Like, dude, give your head a shake, dude. Like, this is absolutely catastrophic, right? And so, and the list goes on and on. I mean, again, we've given, say, a green card for certain subsets of society that were either once victimized or perceived as victims, or whatever the case is, a green card to do whatever they want. Do you know what happens when you give humans the ability to do whatever they want? They will do whatever they want, and it's not gonna be pretty. And so, where is the ownership? Where is the accountability as a community, as a society? All of those things. We got a lot of work to do. But fortunately for us, we went down so fast that I think that there is nowhere else but up. I think there's nowhere else but up. We need to go up, and again, when you talk to people, they're like, well, we don't want things to go back the way they were before, when, guys were misogynist or intolerant or whatever the case may be. It's like, nobody has said anything about a complete 180-degree or a 360 to be, we're talking about how can we meet in the middle? Let's meet in the middle. Yes, there is a need to discuss the fact that some people are different, and that accepting people the way they are, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of the decision, provided that they're obviously not interfering with life of yours or your safety or those types of things. But we can have all of those conversations without changing everything about what we're doing. But what's happening now is certain people, because there's excess on both sides of that fence, certain people want to take these kids and do the complete opposite. Let's put them through a Gogi, and now we're gonna bring back the Spartans. It's like, whoa, calm down. You're a librarian. You're not a Spartan. So we need to be measured in our approach. We need to have conversation, and we need to have the ability to reinstate critical analysis at all level and have conversations that are constructive, even if the conversation is occurring between people that disagree. So if we have a disagreement, let's hash it out in a non-emotional way, in a more detached way, and really see what we can come up with when we put our brains together, understanding that the end goal, that the outcome should be very similar. And if they're not, what are we doing wrong here? So I'm not surprised to see that. Sorry for the convoluted answer here.
No, it was great. I think, I hadn't heard the one thing, and I agree with everything you just said. The one thing I hadn't heard about was the self-assisted suicide for veterans, when the push is so heavy towards trying to help remedy the suicide crisis amongst veterans and first responders. It seems like, well, if you're going to do it, let's do it on our dollar. Let's do it in our way that we want you to do it. So if you're going to do it, just do it the way we prefer you to do it, and we can maybe make a buck in the process.
It is beyond asinine. And to be clear, it was deemed isolated cases. There was a few, and I don't want to make it sound like it's rampant that every day somebody is being offered, assisted suicide. But the fact is, if it was one veteran that's struggling that was offered assisted suicide, that is 100% too much.
Yep.
This should absolutely, in what galaxy should that be, and what level of empathy is that demonstrating from a society that's sending these young men and women to do an extremely difficult job on account of the policies of the politicians that we elect? Like, don't act like you have nothing to do with that decision, because you do. If you had something to say when the troops went to Afghanistan or Iraq, then you had your opportunity to say it. It's called a vote. It's called backlash. It's called protesting. It's called all of those things, but, and I realize that there's a limited amount of power that a person at home that believes in those things is going to have if they act as an individual. I realize that. I'm not asking you to do the impossible, but what I am saying is we often as a society detach ourselves from the outcome, oh, well, the politicians decided that this was going to happen. So we, oh, really? Is that how this works? So the way I look at it, you just reelected them, and these guys are the same guys that send these guys into battle. And so can we and should we as human beings, and I said this and I will say it over and over again, we've technologically more advanced than at least known societies that we know. It's not to say that others have never existed that would, and because it would take about 200 years for all of our stuff to disappear, to leave no trace. So is it possible that in the last 150,000 years, there has been civilization that were more advanced than us and we just don't know them? Yes, it is possible. We know that. And so to think that we somehow are this elevated and we put ourselves on a pedestal, we're this elevated species that's so much smarter than everybody else that's developed all this technology. Well, I got some news for you. We devolve as humanity. Humanity devolved. We evolved technologically. We devolved from a humanity standpoint, from a connection standpoint, from a communication standpoint, from a variety of other standpoints. And so for me, we are at a crossroad right now. We are at a crossroad. Humanity is at a crossroad. Like we're faced with some very, very difficult set of circumstances and decisions in relation to those circumstances that we are going to need to come together for, or else we are going to suffer, and I think that the realization of that needs to happen sooner than later so that we may address these things.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with everything you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, another shift into maybe some of the topic that we were talking about before that last little place I took us, where I took the conversation. And I think this would probably be a good place to kind of maybe find our end. I don't know. But from your philosophy, there is neuroscience that backs it up.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you've talked about in terms of resiliency, there is neuroscience to back it up. And so I've done my studying, and there's two particular areas of neuroscience that I'm aware of that help speak to resiliency neurologically. So what have you learned? And if you're not prepared to talk about it right now, then let me know, or you can just give me kind of a lump sum. But if you have all of the nomenclatures and all of the little details, get into as nerdy with it as you want to.
Mm-hmm. What are we specifically talking about though, in relation?
And the neurology of evolving our mindset, evolving our adaptability, evolving our place from where we are, from starting something to where we are when we stay consistent on the path to where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, everything we literally spoke about is somehow tied to neuroscience, because without that, there isn't. And I was fortunate enough over the years to mix swords with some incredibly smart humans, a lot smarter than I ever was. And some of those humans are like the Gino Calura of this world, or a neuro scientist, and we have or a behavioral scientist, and then we have the Dr. Carlos and some of these guys at PhDs of psychologies and all those things. So we can really piece things together. And for me, everything is about accuracy of information. Yeah, I can motivate you like nobody's business, but if you start breaking down an argument, as soon as you start looking into it, it's all it was is a flash in the pan, and it wasn't grounded. And so if we look at concepts such as, let's take a very, very simple example, manifestation, for example. Manifestation is often seen as if you think of something hard enough, and if you want it hard enough, it will inherently happen. Well, that's not what actually happens. What happens is if you believe in something hard enough and you are wanting something hard enough, you are opening your mind to the prospect of everything that has to do with that something. And what happens is your brain, from a neuroscience standpoint, opens up to the possibility, and the little feelers that are out there will take every piece of information that comes that corroborates your way of thinking, or that corroborates the end goal that you have, or that provides you information that will help you move forward towards that pursuit. Your brain is more capable of retention. You are retaining more information because you're viscerally interested in the subject. You're going to see things, and you're going to send vibrations. Vibrations is a big piece of the biological, spectrum as well. Our cells are vibrating at certain frequencies. Well, when you are engaged in something to a degree that your frequency matches the frequency of that something that you are seeking, you are now attracting that. And so, that's the prospect of saying somebody walked in the room and their vibe was just vibing with me, but that's precisely what this is. So there is physiological, psychological, and all of those things are critically important to a journey as a human being. But in order for you to understand how manifestation works, you need to understand what you can control and what it does from a physiological standpoint. And so once I know that I can engage as hard and as fast as I can and create these opportunities. And it's not magic, it's actions, right? The same goes to survivability. And there's a lot of argument, but we are survival machines that should be procreating and making sure that we're sticking around, just like almost every species. I don't know any species that's like, well, I don't care if my species lives or die, right? Well, we know that in engaging in things that are very uncomfortable, we if we do it willfully, the reaction of our central nervous system, of our body mechanisms are going to be different than if adversity is imposed upon us. Essentially, you can make your life even more miserable as a human being, but if you make the decision to do it, you're way better than if it happens accidentally. And so now we know that self-worth and all of those things are feeding into that loop, that you're going to lessen the stress on your central nervous system by adopting some of these attitudes and some of these things. And doing so is going to help you. But we also know that self-imposed adversity is easier to deal with and digest for the body overall as it is if it happens accidentally. So the punch you prepare for is always better than the punch you're not prepared for.
Yes.
And so if you do your research and you have the information, you know how to leverage your actions to be consistent with the way we work. And for me, that is the ultimate in empowerment, and not knowing that doesn't excuse it. For one, it also doesn't make it any better. And so it's not about becoming a neuroscientist. It's not about becoming a psychologist. It's not about becoming a biologist. It's about understanding below surface level, and as soon as you have an understanding that's below surface level, you can really start manifesting and doing things because everybody else is running on fumes, and that's a reality. Let me give you an example of this. And that's an example I used a million times, and I'm sure people are sick of it, but those that never heard it might benefit from it. So as a result of that, I'll take the risk of embarrassing myself by saying it again. But let's think about something as simple as coffee selection. For example, when you talk to people, and this is something I do when I teach my leadership courses, I'm like, oh, okay, who drinks light roast and dark roast? Raise your hands. And then they always raise their hands, and I ask them, why? And then one person might say, well, I like that there's more caffeine, and I like the taste better, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, well, first of all, if the beans are processed longer, so they're roasted more, then they lose density, which means the caffeine content is slightly lower than a coffee that's not, burnt or roasted nearly as much. But it's negligible. If you want to change the caffeine content, the best way to do it is to increase the amount of coffee you drink, which, isn't always a good thing, but that's how you should address it. Now, more importantly, in order for you to select the right coffee, you need to pick it from the right region. Depending on your taste buds, depending on what you like, depending on the flavors that you like, your coffee is going to reflect exactly where it was grown. So if you want a nutty coffee, perhaps you're in Brazil. If you want a chocolatey coffee, perhaps Ethiopia is the way to go. So let me get this straight. You just woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning. You had one decision to make and you already messed it up because you don't have the knowledge deeper than surface level. Now, let's add another piece to this. Ask guys how they shave, and you're going to get all kinds of weird answers. And the next question is, are you getting razor bumps? And the answer is always yes. Do you know why you're getting razor bumps? Because you're doing multiple passes with a 4-blade razor over the same spot. So you're creating irritation. There's a million different ways to shave, but there is one way to shave properly. That's your second decision of the day. So imagine if you're the type of person that, given to anecdotal stifling, like you're taking information as it is said to you, and you put yourself in a box without any exploration of your own, what you are doing is proliferating, the way that we're doing things, which clearly isn't working for us. And so if you're an introspective human, and if you're a human that's curious about life, is the way I'm shaving the best way I could be shaving? Is there a better way to do it? YouTube, how to shave properly, And now you have an expert that spent 20, 30, 40 years in a barber shop that actually has that as a subject matter expertise. And now you can tap into that person and understand how this works. And so the next day when you wake up, you pick the coffee based on the region that you want the coffee to taste like. When you travel to Hawaii and you're renting a Harley Davidson and you stop in a coffee shop, you don't diminish yourself by saying, I'm just going to take a light roast and a dark roast. You're going to select the coffee that for you is probably the best option. And you're going to get to experience a wider range of experiences and love things that you perhaps would have never tried before. And so this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about surface level thinking and surface level living. The last thing you want to do in this life is to be surface level. Now, you can't be an SME in everything because it's extremely difficult, extremely time consuming, and it's consistent. But you can certainly be below surface level and really exponentially increase your pleasure, exponentially increase the meaning of what you're engaging in, and exponentially increase your results and ultimately your wellness.
Having context behind your decisions helps you make more appropriate decisions for yourself, right? Yeah, that's great. Some of the things from a neuroscience standpoint, the reason why I was asking the question, I was going to see if you had anything more in your studies, because I know you're doing research, you're researching for a book and all this kind of stuff. So I was going to see if you had anything to add to it. So there's two kind of areas. One is shaped off the other. So to kind of go over that, like Dr. Andrew Huberman helped popularize the anterior mid-cingulate cortex and what that does. But first, let's talk about the less popular thing. So first is like serotonin. Mm-hmm. And most people, like you said earlier in the conversation, serotonin's part of this feel-good molecule, but it's an oversimplification, right? Like just like everything is, when you kind of put like dopamine is the happy molecule or something, right? Like an oversimplification, right? But yeah, serotonin is involved in in so much. So it can excite or inhibit activity. So oftentimes we focus on the excitatory response, but not the inhibitory response. And we can kind of go into all the different areas, but for the sake of time, like it can affect like obesity, sleep, impulsivity, all these different sorts of things. And a flooding of serotonin, and too much of it can cause all these types of things from a negative aspect. So serotonin, when somebody is faced with a stressful response, and whatever is stressful, depending on them and their own level of resilience, right? But whenever they're faced with a stressful response, serotonin will naturally flood to this 1A receptor that we have. And so I'll just define the difference between the 1A receptor and the 2A receptor. But the 1A receptor is this passive response. So that's our default mode, is serotonin. When we're flooded with serotonin as a result of stress, default mode is 1A receptor gets flooded. And it puts us into this passive state. It puts us into this state where, like you said, we seek security naturally as human beings, and we can abuse the crap out of that and get to where we are now today. But we seek security nonetheless. And so this passive receptor gets flooded. So the 2A receptor is this active receptor. So again, 1A helps us tolerate stress through emotional blunting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so our emotions get blunted through the 1A, and the active response, the 2A, it helps us navigate stress through active reasoning and adaptability. So through active reasoning and adaptability. And so here's how this plays out. So you're hit with a stressful situation, and then serotonin floods the 1A receptor. And you can then lean into that avoidance and just stay there and not do anything about whatever the stressful thing is, or hide from the stress. and not actively pursue it. That has one consequence, and it's a big one. I'll talk about that in a second. But then you have what you can do when that happens is you can pull yourself into a state of attunement or mindfulness and start to take that 1A receptor and partner up with your prefrontal cortex. And then you can make a decision, right? And most people know your prefrontal cortex, that's the decision maker. That's the thing that's going to bring rationality into your life. So you can take that 1A receptor, partner up with your prefrontal cortex, and try to manage the best case scenario of how to handle the stress in front of you instead of avoiding it, right? So you handle the stress in front of you. Let's say you do that. The serotonin begins to deplete from the 1A receptor and go into the 2A receptor, which is almost all within the limbic system. But when that happens, this is what's crazy. When most of the serotonin leaves the 1A and goes into the 2A, there's neurogenesis plus neuroplasticity that takes place, right? So the brain begins to evolve and create more neurons and begins to take the neurons that you have and evolve and shift those neurons into a new behavioral pattern. So not only are you learning something new when you begin to take on this process, but also you're shifting your mindset or previous belief set and put mindset towards something, and allows the brain to adapt and take on new beliefs or new thought patterns, new behaviors, which is pretty incredible, right? So you do that consistently over the period of, let's say, years, because building foundation can take some time, but you do that consistently over a period of time, you build up some really strong foundations and core beliefs about the way the world works around you and how you are not a victim in the world and how you can take action toward yourself in the world and that sort of stuff. That's pretty incredible. The opposite is, let's say you do nothing, the serotonin stays flooded in that 1A receptor for approximately 48 hours. And this is within, specifically, it's called the Dorsraft nuclei. Within that area of the brain stays flooded with serotonin for 48 hours. So the way to think about it is you have a 48-hour contagious consequence where you now, for the next 48 hours, are far more likely to continue to avoid and regret and not take action for 48 hours because of the flooding that's taken place within that area. So you've now given yourself this response that now you're infected for 48 hours. So that's something that I think is pretty interesting when we talk about the concept of building up resilience versus the avoidance of, right? And doing the easy thing, or doing maybe not the easy thing, but the thing that feels safer at the time, you know? And then as a result, what I'll say real quick as a result is that, again, this anterior mid-cingulate cortex area, and this either expands and grows or it shrinks. And what they found is for people that have high levels of resilience through doing things that they know, through doing behaviors and actions that they would prefer not to do, but do because they know what's good for them, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex grows and expands. So this could be somebody that stays specifically on a good nutritious diet or stays consistent with exercise. Now, for some people, like you said, like maybe you don't exercise because you love it. Maybe you exercise because you love the result of the exercise. Two totally different things, right? Like if you're doing something that you enjoy doing, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex doesn't grow. If you do something that you know that's going to benefit you in the long run, but you would prefer to avoid it, again, it's going to grow and expand. And you can kind of keep it and maintain it, not through extreme measures, but just through sustainability, which is interesting. But if we go back to that 1A receptor thing, if we're living in that place of the 1A receptor, that anterior mid-cingulate cortex, if it was once big, will shrink. And if it doesn't continue to allow yourself to transition into the 2A receptor, it will continue to stay small, right? And so if I were to sum up everything I just said, let's just go with the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. You want that thing to be big, and the only way that thing can be large or grow in size is by doing things that are hard and challenging.
Sure. And I love nerding out on stuff like that and information. One thing that I caution people against when they engage that way, not you specifically, but just like people
No,
in
you can bring
general.
it on. Correct me if
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
it's just that the vast majority of people on the verge of illiteracy, right? To begin with. And if you're in victim mentality and I give you all this information, you're going to go deeper in victim mentality because you think that overcoming whatever it is that you are faced with is impossible because you need to be essentially a scientist to do it. If we were to keep something very, very simple, like how detrimental would it be to tell somebody that for the next 48 hours, you're going to be stuck because that's what's going to happen. Now, you've heard about the Munster study where they took kids from two different groups in the early 60s or 50s, and they took kids from same upbringing, same everything, and they separate them in two groups. They told the teachers that these guys were gifted, and they told the teachers that these guys had a speech impediment, and they told the people themselves, you have a speech impediment and you are gifted. And at the end of it, they both lived up to those expectations, right? And so not an ethical study by any stretch of the imagination, but the point I'm making here is that, say if I tell somebody that has victim mentality that for the next 48 hours, they're going to be justified not doing anything because their brain function is doing that, I'm not helping, right? And so what's important to understand is that despite all the knowledge of the mechanisms that we employ as human beings to navigate life, we are meant to do that. Stop thinking about it, engage in life and do the things. We go to these different countries where there's a constant source of adversity. People are consistently struggling with something which is absolutely legitimate, the risk of physical harm or death, or which is constant. Like take a place like Haiti, for example, or Somalia. And you're going to find that people never stop to think about mental wellness, yet the levels of in Haiti, for example, the percentage of suicides is like 14% lower than Canada. Like these kids are 7 or 8. They're walking over to school. They hear automatic gunfire. They see bodies everywhere. They do all this stuff. How do you explain that? You explain that because they have a constant source of adversity. Their body reacts to the circumstances that they're put through, and they have anchors. And those anchors, if they're responsibilized, they have to work hard, all of the things that we have taken away from our kids, And so for me, when it comes to nerding out, and as valuable as that information is, if you have an academic background or if you have an academic mind or even an intellectual mind, it could be very interesting, but you have to be very careful that you don't pigeonhole yourself in a quote unquote predictable response because you know what that response is supposed to be. Whereas if you're engaging in life and you're doing the things and to a certain extent, you understand that there is science behind it, but you're not too worried about the intricacies of it and try to perhaps affect them or whatever, you're actually probably going to do a better job at living life a little bit more well without overwhelming yourself. Now, imagine you have an anxiety problem and you start thinking about all these moving parts. What does that do to your anxiety? And so for me, as much as I love getting in there and nerding out and all this stuff, again, I'd rather go slightly below surface than very, very deep, especially when it comes to coaching. Because, I imagine, for example, if somebody has never done jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter if it's a blue belt teaching him or Rickson Gracie, But if you take a black belt and you bring Rickson Gracie in, now that black belt is really benefiting from that because they're at the level at which they can actually, engage in that and really understand
a great
it.
example.
Yeah. So, I kind of, when I coach my clients and when we're going through and trying to establish what the future is going to look forward for them, or what are some of the actions that they can be taken to manifest or materialize the things that they're wanting, it's very, very rare that I'm going to dive really deep into all the mechanisms and things because I don't even want to give them ammunition to have a reason why this isn't working, or because that's what's going to happen is they're going to latch onto that. Not everybody. There's a lot of people out there that are educated, even if they're not formally educated, but have, street smart and some knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I don't want to take away from anybody by what I'm saying, but the vast majority of people are not academically inclined or intellectually inclined. And it's going to be very difficult for them to decipher where they should be putting their energy,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a great example that you just gave with the Hicks and Gracie versus, I mean, my only pushback would be in the sense of like from a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint.
Mhm.
Like you said, you can go more surface level and you wouldn't even have to explain it in the way I just did. But what I find with my clients is when they're dealing with, whether it's like, let's say it's anxiety or something, or let's just say, and more simple, it's with them wanting to avoid the day. Let's say they don't really
Mhm.
take on the day. In the same way, from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, where you can step back and try to do some mindfulness and just like try to start with something basic, like, okay, here's an approach that I can do. What are my negative thoughts telling me about myself? How can I approach those negative thoughts and then go from there? In the same way, like if someone can go from a place of being like, okay, so I don't need to know all the details that Kenny said there, but am I allowing myself just to continue to stay in this place, or am I doing something to get out of this place? And kind of take it more from a simplistic standpoint. But yeah, and then for me, like you said, with the Hicks and Gracie analogy, like for me, and if I'm working with somebody who's been doing this kind of work for a while, then it is like, for me, like if I'm going out right now, I'm not doing this anytime soon because, like I said, with my ACL. But if I'm looking at my tennis shoes and I'm like, I don't want to put those things on because I don't want to go out for 15 miles today, and it's whatever the temperature and all these excuses that are coming up, the roads of resistance that are in front of me. For me, being able to think, okay, anterior mid-cingulate cortex, what am I doing to it today? Am I going to allow that thing can I at least maintain it by getting out on the track today? Maybe I don't even finish my 15 miles because I'm feeling like crap, but can I at least maintain it by getting out on the track today? And then maybe when I'm out on the track, I'm feeling good. And then, after 5 miles, I feel good. And then I finish up what I wanted to do in the first place. But anyway, the analogy you gave about the Hicks and Gracie and versus the blue belt dealing with somebody who's first time on the mat, it really doesn't matter. So keep it as simple as possible. You're going to have to cover the basics of like how to fall down appropriately, right? Yeah.
No, 100%. But even if you look at something you brought up in this conversation, for example, which is negatively biased, right? You're looking at things and you're having these negative emotions in relation to something. Well, humans are negatively biased by design. That, again, it's another survival mechanism. So as long as we understand that, now we know what I'm feeling right now and the negative voices in my head are normal. They're not going away. Humans are trying to fix everything. There is no light without darkness. The difference between a person that's highly performing in any field of endeavor and the person that isn't has nothing to do with the voices not being present. It has everything to do with how they address the voices when they do come, And I think that people have a tendency to really take their own weapons away by assigning or by almost imposing upon others that they are not facing the same circumstances than them, which allows them to remain in victimhood, which allows them to realize that there is a nuance that makes their reaction normal in light of the totality of the circumstances, when the reality is that, no, what you are dealing with, what you're going through right now, and all of the hardship that you are facing, every street corner, somebody has it worse than you. That is a fact. Every street corner, somebody has it worse than you. Now, we've made it, because we're in a society of victim, we made it that seeking perspective is an invalidation. Seeking perspective isn't an invalidation. Invalidation is invalidation. So if you're seeking a perspective and you build upon that perspective, that's a positive thing. But if you're seeking a perspective of somebody that has it way worse than you, that's managed to overcome, but you then say, well, you take away from what you are going through, now you are invalidating. And if you are doing that, that is not a healthy way to use perspective. But the reality is perspective is highly critical. It is. We look up to people for a reason. We like superheroes for a reason. We like all these people that are highly functioning for a reason. and we try to emulate some of the behaviors. We try to, we know to a certain extent, we get motivated, we do all of those things. And so that is healthy perspective, as long as you're not denigrating others on account of their success, or that you are not invalidating your own emotions in relation to how you feel after you've sought said perspective, And so for me, imagine if you told somebody that we are by nature negatively biased and everybody has these voices. You're not the only one. We all get them. Okay.
Mhm.
So this is what I do when they happen. This person does this when this happened. This other person has a different mechanism. So that once you have 50 different options on how to address the things that are causing you harm, I cannot believe that in 6 months, you're going to come to me and say, I've tried everything. And you're going to be, if we'd be lucky to put 5 on paper, right? So that means there's another 45 you haven't tried. And that's for various reasons. Either you didn't believe in them, or you were, viscerally resistant to them on account of whatever existential crisis you got going on. Whatever the case is, it's important to understand that, again, that open-mindedness and really taking the time to evaluate what could be beneficial for us is the key. Now, people might listen to this podcast and say, man, that sounds like a lot of work. But imagine if you front-loaded that work and you have another 40 or 50 years of life to live, and you are living all that you ever wanted because you have taken those steps. Would it be worth it? And the answer is the answer cannot be anything but yes. It's going to be absolutely worth it, because guess what? That 40 or 30 or 20 years that you spent making yourself into the human being that you wanted to be, were going to happen regardless if you stay the same. So now you're 20 years later, you're 20 years older, but you're at the exact same point because you didn't take on, the challenge of really building yourself up. And we're in a world of instant gratification, so we really resent things that take time. Anything meaningful in life takes time. Nothing meaningful doesn't take time, And some things are faster than other and all this stuff. But I'll tell you what, just like I tell people when they tell me, I'd love to do jiu-jitsu, but how long does it take to get a black belt? I'm like, what are you worried about black belt for, white belt? But I can tell you something. Tomorrow, you're going to be better than you were the day before. That should be motivating enough. That should be, triggering the want to engage in this, because imagine what that's going to be like in 2 years. So now in 2 years, which would have passed anyways, you are now a completely different humans from a, say, self-defense perspective, or from a calmness perspective, or from an ability to manage adversity perspective, because we know that metaphorically speaking, jiu-jitsu is extremely relevant to life, and for those that haven't experienced that, just haven't done it. But once you do it, you realize that, man, this made me a better human when faced with adversity. And it did so in such short order, And so I just, essentially, when somebody listens to this, even right now, when somebody listens to all of the stuff that we've spoken about, it seems as though there is an unmanageable amount of information, but it really isn't. It's quite simple, and I like the fact that you've recommended people listen to it several times so that they can understand where they can action, because actionable item value is really important. I mean, we can have the best conversation in the world, talk about all these great concepts, but if there are no actionable items, how is somebody with less technical knowledge supposed to make sense of any of the stuff we spoke about?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and that's a perfect way to end this episode if we're going to end it, because otherwise I'm just going to keep talking your ear off. But yeah, I mean, this has been great, Seb. This has been great. Thank you so much. Dude, I am honored to have you on and to allow you to share your wisdom on this very small platform. I really appreciate it. So just thank you so much for coming on, man. I'm honored.
Yeah, man, it was a great conversation. I really appreciated it. And I hope that your people are sort of seeing value in this.
Is there anything that I missed that you feel like you wanted to clarify, or anything, books on the horizon maybe, or anything like that you want to plug?
I mean, plug, maybe not, but I mean, Sean Taylor and I, your former guest, are writing a book at the moment, and it should be out in the next, we're probably looking at 7-8 months, is roughly. I mean, this is no set in stone timeline, because of course there are always setbacks and things that we need to work through. But we're hoping to really bring to bear a lot of the concepts that we discussed today and bring them in different angles so that people that are overwhelmed with all the information that's out there have a book that most of the things are in, so that you can somewhat navigate some of the challenges that you're having and really elevate yourself. And that's really the key of what we're trying to do, is to elevate others. And so stay tuned for that. There will be all kinds of social media. There will be all kinds of, sort of marketing and some key people to review it and weigh it on it and all this good stuff. But our goal, both of us, is to give back as much as we possibly can. And we've dedicated ourselves to do that. And hopefully it hits the marks where it needs to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Seb. Yeah. And we'll be excited for that book to come out. Is there going to be an Audible version, and who's doing the Audible version?
Of course there is going to be.
Are both of you guys going to do Audible both?
We don't know yet. We'll have to, we'll have to ask people and see what they want to hear. And if they prefer having professional actors do it, I'm in. If they want me to speak it, I'm in.
My input, you please use. So like I'm dyslexic. So most of the books I take in is through Audible, and there's a clear difference between the connection of the words being read, if it's with the author or with when it's with the voice actor. It feels cheesy with the voice actor. When it's with the author, it's like you can connect with it through, like, audio wise, you're almost connecting with the audio. I don't know. I can't explain it obviously very well through my words.
I agree.
But there is a deeper connection to the words being said.
I agree. And especially if there's, generally speaking, when you buy a book, you have an idea of who the person is. You've either seen them in social media posts, or you've seen them on movies or documentaries or presentation or guest speaking appearances, whatever that is. And so there's already a bit of cognitive recognition bias there. And once you have recognition bias, it's always easier to connect with someone. And the alternative to this is to have somebody vouch for that person, which increases the amount of connection you can reach quickly. But the real money is to know that person. And if you do, now you can have some real, and I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much, Seb. I appreciate having you on, man.
Thank you for having me, brother.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Patina'd podcast. There are other shows that emphasize resilience, but my intent is to normalize personal development through embracing challenge by interviewing the common man and woman, the person that you and I can relate to. If you are someone who wants to soak up the insights of normal people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe. If you know somebody who is overwhelmed by fear and complacency, please share this podcast with them. I'm your host, Kenny Hill, and I run a private practice near Sacramento, California called Recovery Hill. My website is in the description tab along with my social media links.
The scar tissue woven integrates each imperfection, a familiar face. We wear our struggles, no trace erased. In vulnerability we find our place. Rust is gray, not decay. We're chasing shadows in the light, embracing failures, wings take flight. Within the darkness we find our sight. The Patina'd